I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Nick Scott.
And that's actually the great thing about storytelling, where maybe it overlaps with filmmaking or even, writing novels. Essentially, it's kind of like the great ethos of the great brands are they're a very simple proposition, and then they have very simple, memorable taglines. And in a sense, if you think about great movies, they have very simple log lines. So I think there is a commonality of the purity of an idea.
Founding the studio with over 20 years of experience at the highest levels of filmmaking, Nick Scott has directed numerous international TV series, multiple BAFTA Oscar-qualifying shorts, as well as documentaries for world-leading brands. His storytelling lists award-winning and entertainment projects across household name brands such as BBC, Film 4, Virgin, CBS, Tilda, Chivas, Novotel, and Google. Nick has just completed his first feature film, Me and the Sea, and he's my guest this week on the On Brand podcast. My interview with Nick Scott is coming right up, but first, as a business-to-business marketer, your needs are unique. B2B buying cycles are long and your customers face incredibly complex decisions. Isn't it time you had a marketing platform built specifically for you? LinkedIn ads empower marketers with solutions for you and your customers. LinkedIn ads allow you to build the right relationships, drive results, and reach your customers in a respectful manner. On LinkedIn, you'll have access to and build relationships with decision makers. Of the 875 million users on the network, 180 million are senior level executives, 10 million are C-level executives. You'll also be able to drive results with targeting and measurement tools built specifically for B2B. And they work. Audiences exposed to brand messages on LinkedIn are 6 times more likely to convert. LinkedIn Ads is also ranked number 1 for security, community, and ad experience as part of Business Insider's Digital Trust Study. Make B2B marketing everything it can be and get a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply.
We know you listen to Marketing Podcast Network shows like this one because you are smart, discerning, and have impeccable taste. We've been brainstorming ways to reward you for listening and have something. MPN is a proud sponsor of the Creator Economy Expo 2023. That means you get a discount. This event is for content creators and entrepreneurs interested in building and growing their content-first businesses. Join over 500 bloggers, podcasters, authors, newsletter writers, speakers, coaches, consultants, and freelancers at the learning and networking event for content creators. Plan to attend May 1st through the 3rd in Cleveland, Ohio, and just for listening to the Marketing Podcast Network, you get $100 off your ticket. Go to cex.events to register. Use the coupon code MPN100. That's cex.events. Just type that into your browser, the whole thing, cex.events. The code MPN100. Creator Economy Expo, Cleveland, May 1st through the 3rd. See you there.
Nick Scott, welcome to On Brand.
Thank you very much for having me here.
I am excited to chat with you, mostly because we get all sorts of different bios here on the On Brand podcast, and a lot of folks come up with a specific business marketing background. But your background as a creative is fascinating. Talk to us a bit about. It seems like your perspective as a brand builder is very much one as a filmmaker. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, I think so. I set up a company called Studio Hansa, which we currently have this ethos that we're quite happy with, that we call truly moving content. So really, most of what we do has a moving image component to it. And historically, I've always worked for brands, whether that's helping create brands in a sense of what we might talk about Ukraine, Suspilna, the public broadcaster of Ukraine, but also whether that's increasingly branded content, commercials, idents, all that sort of stuff, really, and tangentially. Having always been interested in moving image and the fact that moving image now plays such a massive part in marketing efforts with the growth of social media, TikTok, etc. I've sort of pursued a passion in all sorts of films and personal content that, in a sense, used to be a bit of a tangent, that made short films that got great acclaim that could sort of filter into the day job, so to speak. But then those worlds have merged, really, in that, brands now are looking for less commercial narratives and content. And so, yes, it is relatively unconventional, but in a sense, it's kind of become more conventional in the last five or 10 years, really. If I hope that sort of makes sense.
It does. And as you talk about like the last 5 to 10 years, and by the way, I love the ethos of truly moving content. And I would assume that as you talk about becoming, more typical here in over the past few years, I feel like when it comes to content, which I think is, kind of sometimes as a label is sometimes the opposite of moving, because it feels like it can be anything. That's just the content. But we want to create content that's moving. But I think the medium of the content over the past 5 to 10 years that you're talking about, we really see that moving images, that video, that the social media that is, has the greatest gravitational pull right now, is driven by images that move. So do you think that it's because we're now requiring a greater focus as brands on moving images that people with backgrounds like yours are probably more in demand than ever?
Yeah, I think that actually, as you say, tracks with what I've seen over the past 20 years, in a sense, just to go back a little bit further, that one of the reasons why we still have a very firm finger in sort of foot in branding is because a lot of what I did came out of being out of the .com bubble, where the kind of silos broke down quite a lot more. Essentially, I was working for an agency where we were doing a lot of branding and pure branding, and we did a lot of moving image then, in a sense, in the mold that why we have the expertise to do things like a rebrand of the public broadcaster of Ukraine came out from that era, and came from a sort of the democratization a bit of 20 years ago, digital tools, breaking down some of those barriers. So, and I think that's only really accelerated. So that also sort of explains my journey and why we can span some on the surface that could seem quite seemingly disparate things, from branding to content. But I think the appetite for moving images has clearly never gone away. It's the tools by which moving images get seen has only grown and grown. So I think having a foundation of really good core branding and also really good core storytelling empowers sort of, I suppose, our studio to be perfect to sort of combine branding, storytelling, and execution, rather than maybe in the days gone by, moving image was an execution only part of the marketing mix.
Yeah.
So, and then you've got the other side of it where there's a brilliance, that it's in the hands of often people that are sort of, smarter than us, creating huge volume of engagement with simple tools, with their own content, like yourself, really. But then obviously with that there comes, the sort of the power is obviously brilliant, but I suppose in a marketing mix it can come with a bit of jeopardy, that because everybody can do something doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's an expert at something. So yeah.
Absolutely. That's such a good point. And I almost, as you were talking about all of that, I feel like I almost saw like three overlapping circles, because you've got the brand that you've built, you've got the stories that you should be telling as a brand,
And then you've got the moving images, the media aspect of that as well. And I feel like we don't always have those circles overlapping as much as we do. You talked about the foundation of a good brand. What role does having the brand story clearly articulate? What role does that play in bringing your images to life in a moving manner?
I think it's hugely important. I think a lot of the work we, or the people I work with in our studio or as clients or elsewhere, a lot of what we do, I think, can look very different in that we at Studio Hansa have a very broad repertoire. Let's say, I think, of pretty high caliber execution, but we always drive it back to really often we like, and I think it holds true, we can explain the idea of what we make, even if it looks flourished and rich and engaging, into a very simple premise. And I still think that's actually the great thing about storytelling, and where maybe it overlaps with filmmaking or even writing novels. Essentially, it's kind of like the great ethos of the great brands are they're a very simple proposition, and then they have very simple, memorable taglines. And in a sense, if you think about great movies, they have very simple log lines, and the same with novels. So I think there is a commonality of the purity of an idea is neither the preserve of a great film, a great novel, or a great brand, but it's actually the common denominator between great executions and great engagement with audiences in all of them.
That's such a good point on simplicity. And, it makes me think of, I was listening to a podcast conversation with the author and illustrator, Mo Willems, of the children's author, Pigeon Riding the Bus and Knuffle Bunny and so forth. And he said that simple and easy are opposites. And I think that's so true, because we have trouble with simplicity. We tend to, especially in the complex and intangible work of brand building, we are so quick to want to add things to it and make them more complex than they need to be. But your point about that kind of underlying truth of the best brands, the best novels, the best movies have a simple, I think you mentioned it as a log line. And for any folks that don't come from a movie making background, what can you define a log line and maybe give an example for folks?
Oh, I don't know any examples off the top of my head, but I know that I think maybe an elevator pitch is another way for saying a log line. It's literally your two sentences or your paragraph that you get in the increasingly demanding world of people's attention to really punctuate why your idea is great. And I think, although we all know that, great ideas aren't 10 a penny, but there's a lot of great ideas that if you can't follow through executionally, they will not see the light of day. But at the very least, they need to be very incisive, clear ideas. So I think the elevator pitch is a good equivalent of a log line.
On Brand, we'll be right back after this.
As a business-to-business marketer, your needs are unique. B2B buying cycles are long and your customers face incredibly complex decisions. Isn't it time you had a marketing platform built specifically for you? LinkedIn ads empower marketers with solutions for you and your customers. LinkedIn ads allow you to build the right relationships, drive results, and reach your customers in a respectful manner. On LinkedIn, you'll have access to and build relationships with decision makers. Of the 875 million users on the network, 180 million are senior level executives, 10 million are C-level executives. You'll also be able to drive results with targeting and measurement tools built specifically for B2B. And they work. Audiences exposed to brand messages on LinkedIn are 6 times more likely to convert. LinkedIn Ads is also ranked number 1 for security, community, and ad experience as part of Business Insider's Digital Trust Study. Make B2B marketing everything it can be and get a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply.
Search engine optimization can be confusing, but your business can benefit from it regardless of what you do. SEMrush, an all-in-one digital marketing suite, can cover key SEO activities, including tracking your competitors' keyword strategies, improving search rankings, and much more. Why choose multiple solutions when you can use just one? Start your free trial today and get on top. Go to bit.ly/SEMrushMPN. That's bit.ly, bit.ly/SEMrushMPN.
Now, back to the show. So I want to talk to you about one of what you've described as one of the most meaningful things that you've worked on recently and maybe forever, and that is the work around Ukraine's public broadcast system, sort of their equivalent of BBC. Especially with everything going on there, talk a bit about how that project came to you and what the challenge was there.
Well, it's interesting because there's a really nice segue here that actually ultimately that project became a debranding project as much as it was a rebranding project. So simplicity was a huge part of what we delivered and also essentially what we were briefed. So it came via an initial pitch process that BBC in the UK helped moderate. This was before anybody knew anything to do with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It was, I think, maybe around October 2021, I think. So we went through that initial pitch process, which was an incredibly reaffirming pitch process because it wasn't a lot of execution. It was discussions on what we would do, how we saw things, what we would advise, moderated by the BBC, who were engaged by the Ukraine broadcaster to deliver excellence, basically. In that no one's perfect. There's pros and cons that some people see against the BBC, but by and by they're perceived as very high stature, integrity, and a role model, I guess, to the likes of public broadcasters of, say, Ukraine. So they requested that the BBC help advise them on how they rebrand. And at that time, and as always, media networks are always very competitive, but they were, I think, losing trust, and they were perceived as a state broadcaster, not a public broadcaster, which is important to think of now because we now know that all of that stuff is very different. At that time, what we thought of as a state broadcaster, we weren't really so in touch with, or the average person wasn't so in touch with the dynamic between Russia and Ukraine. They soon would be, obviously. But with that project, what we were asked to do was to reaffirm that this was not a state broadcaster, and it hadn't been for a long time. It was owned by the public of Ukraine. Naturally, even at that time, there was some historical, let's say, questionable trust that the public placed in things that used to be state-owned. So we were asked to sort of help build that trust, do a new brand that basically was future-facing, to put the broadcaster in a great place to be a contemporary broadcaster, up to date on the world stage, on the European stage, and to, let's say, throw off any of the former associations with certain state ownership.
So, you were talking about the concept of debranding, and I want to come back to that in a bit. But building trust, I would say, is at the heart of a lot of our work as brand builders, and that's not an easy thing to check off of a list, especially in the scenario that you mentioned. So, with that as the objective, how did you go about working to build or rebuild trust?
Well, we also have a sister company which is great that are called PS London, who have really heavy strategy credentials that were part of our sort of pitch. So the initial process was a very in-depth kind of audit, not only of where the brand had been, what it had done, but the culture of Ukraine, the principles of what defined them as people, and really just all working together to sort of have a really thorough strategic assessment of what were the core tenets that made them distinctive and what were the core things that sort of made them trustworthy, I suppose. And there was a lot of those, to be honest. So, but that was the first port of call, was really distilling that down into sort of a few things that were fundamental truths and essences that the brand could be built upon.
That is such a great point and an important point of connection too. When you talk about debranding, I get back to, like you said, it was a kind of a good point of connection between what we were talking about before and the need for simplicity as brands, in distilling all of that. And I think about this concept of debranding, and with Ukrainian public broadcasting, that is an obvious need there. But I wonder if there's a way that we maybe need to apply some of this concept of debranding to other aspects where we may be over branded or more complex than we need to be. Or am I just taking your concept and trying to do something else with it?
No, I mean, I really agree. I think it sort of connects with what I said earlier about what we were discussing, quite from your very wise prompts of, simplicity, log lines, core tenets of brands, whether they are, now, in a sense, I think you can still identify, say, a Nike with a just do it proposition, but still see how rich it fills its brand in various beautiful executions in lots of different media, or just how it engages with audiences. But I think remembering that, like, what how could we debrand and declutter is important, and it is different from necessarily, saying, oh, a new brand is a tiny little black dot on a white space, and it's super reductive. I don't think it always has to be that way, but I think reducing the clutter, as we know, is kind of good in our lives. It's also good in the lives of any brand or anything. I think any organism, any brand, any mindset, reducing the things that aren't serving you, I think is another way of, saying debranding. Debranding is really just at the marketing end of that kind of conversation.
So, if you were to take an approach like that, I like that you kind of mentioned anything that didn't serve you. Are there ways of kind of looking at and auditing your existing brand where you may see if there's extra things that aren't working for you?
Yeah, I think. I mean, the two case studies I have, which are close to me because they're recent, would be the Ukraine rebrand that we're talking about, but also even when I introduced by saying truly moving content. Essentially, I find that's a debrand for us, that we got to a stage where the longer we'd been around, we had more really great stuff, but it was stuff. and what do we say that we are? And I think that really resonated with me. I won't do it service because I might get it wrong, but you said the difference between simple and easy is it took us quite a long time to arrive on various iterations of something that I think we've wanted for a while, which is truly moving content. For us, was a D brand in a way that's our elevator pitch to be like a funnel and a kind of touchstone for, it kind of makes sense when you see what we do, but it also explains what we do without a lot of clutter. The idea for us that we were sort of, okay, so we've got all this stuff. Often it's moving image. Is that commercials? Is that branded content? Is that rebrands? How do we tie all this together, to get to this truly moving content idea that we were saying, yes, it moves, but it's also truly moving because we always tie it and we really work really hard to try it to a really fundamental truth and a simple idea. Easy when you say it. Actually took us quite a long time to kind of settle on that. But I guess I suppose that's also the difference between, I think if you were to use the word debrand, it can't be underestimated that you have to be successful at what that essence is. It's not just, not that you would do an arbitrary reduction. It's an absolutely difficult task of defining all these things into like almost a very simple code, without sort of aggrandizing it, that it isn't that easy to crack off the outset. And when you do, you maybe look at it and go, yeah, it was easy. It was there all the time. And so that's what a lot of truths are, but it doesn't mean that you can see them when they're right in front of your face. But when you make that visible, you go, oh yes. But then I suppose that is the beauty of insight. That's always been the beauty of great storytellers, philosophers, branders, marketeers, filmmakers, writers, that they have that gift of unlocking that very simple thing that was sort of there all the time.
I love that. I love that line of truly moving content. But I also think that example. I know we have a lot of marketers and agency professional service folks listening, and I think it's really easy, like you said, as you were talking about your own studio, you go on and you develop all of these. I think, like you said, just things that you do. And I feel like sometimes we take the adding of all of these things, and we kind of take an SEO type approach. We want to be optimized for all of these things that we can do, instead of reducing. You talked about reduction and reducing it down to that key point, that most basic essence of moving content. And I think that's a powerful application. It makes me smile, which is my other segue alert that it is time to ask you, Nick, for a brand that has made you smile recently.
Wow. I had it planned that I would go, right, I'm going to park that one. And then when I'm asked, I'm going to really nail it. But I haven't actually. So, wow, who's made me smile? Oh, I don't know if it makes me smile. Well, yeah, it does. Actually, that's probably a good one. I mean, I used Nike as an example before.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a lateral example, because I like so much of what they've done historically. I like their shtick and I like their products. But I thought what did make me smile was when LeBron James broke the scoring record. Are you familiar with the photograph that was taken? That photograph where the photographer beautifully captured LeBron James taking the shot, and everybody in the crowd on their mobile phones.
Yeah. And
that beautifully framed the one person that wasn't on their mobile phone that was taking it in was the founder of Nike. And I thought I found that really inspirational on a lot of levels. Inspirational because it's LeBron James doing something amazing. Inspirational because it's kind of a commentary, neither good nor bad. It's not saying the people that were on their phones were wrong, or I don't think it was a judgment. it was an observation of the sea of these people. And it was that, this guy that had set up this incredible brand was there at that moment, and if you could concentrate on the side of it, like, wow, kind of what a legend he is. But the fact that a photographer had captured that one beautifully layered strata of things, that actually did make me smile, and that actually gave me goosebumps. So I hope that one answers that.
That's a great example, and really, pun alert, on brand, given what we've been talking about, I guess that's not a moving image, but it's a moving image in another sense of moving for the reasons that you note. Nick, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
To learn more, easiest place is to go to studiohansa.com. studiohansa.com, and that's a great starting point to get an overview of what I do and what we do.
Awesome. Well, we'll link up to that in our show notes, which folks can always find at onbrandpodcast.com. Nick, thanks for being on brand with us.
Great, no problem. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.